Welcome to Make It To The Dogears. I'm going to dive in with some random pages. The Bride and the Camel. Moved east along the walls of the northern gate, known then as St. Stephen's Gate, Damascus Gate. Damascus Gate, to join with the forces of the Crusaders Commander-Chief Godfrey of Bouillon. Godfrey was a supreme hero, the slave of Christ, the paragon of knighthood, the advocate of the Holy Sepulchre, later the first de facto Christian king of Jerusalem. July 15, 1099, the Dies Veneris, the Friday on which the medieval believer Christ redeemed the whole world. On the cross, Tancred finally breached the wall. His soldiers poured through the gap in the Jewish quarter of the city, known as Juiveri, while Godfrey's soldiers were let through the gate of Jehoshaphat on the east. Almost simultaneously, the forces of Raymond of St. Giles streamed over the southern wall. They converged on the Temple Mount, where an immense number of Muslims had taken refuge and prepared to make their last stand. There the orgy of slaughter began. For 2 whole days, these Christian soldiers massacred every living creature that was not of their own kind. At the Temple Mount alone, it was said that 10,000 were killed. According to Fulcher of Chartres, some of these had their bodies ripped open because it was rumored that Muslims were swallowing gold bezants in desperation. For the whole city, the estimate of the slain was 40,000 Muslims, men, women, and children. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the holiest church in Christendom, the site of Calvary, was in cold blood. They found the Jews of Jerusalem huddled in their synagogue, ready for martyrdom. And they burned the prayer place down, dancing on the burning pyre and singing the Te Deum. After the killing, the looting followed. The Mosque of Omar, dedicated second successor of the Prophet and contiguous to the Holy Sepulchre, was sacked. The tomb of Abraham was destroyed. The Crusaders went about their work joyfully, confident in its righteousness, proud of doing God's work, as in their humble mortality they saw it. In the temple in the Port of Solomon, men rode in blood up to the knees in bridal range, or one expensive participant ran with the dealers. The ascent of money, the return of risk. Of his death, the fund that had originally been intended to support the widows of a few hundred clergymen grew steadily to become the general insurance and pension fund we know today as Scottish Widows. Though it was not just another financial services provider, having taken over by Lloyds Bank in 1999, Scottish Widows is still seen as exemplifying the benefits of Calvinist thrift, thanks in no small measure one of the most successful advertising campaigns in financial history. No one anticipated back in the 1740s was that by constantly increasing the number of people paying premiums, insurance companies and their close relatives, the pension funds would rise to become some of the biggest investors in the world. So-called institutional investors who today dominate global financial markets. But anyway, the Rhizome represents something. When after the Second World War, insurance companies were allowed to start investing in the stock market, they quickly snapped up huge chunks of the British economy. Scott was a victim of the financial crisis triggered by the first Latin American debt crisis. Perhaps he was also a victim of his own appetite for real estate. To help finance the cost of his beloved country seat at Abbotsford, the author had become a sleeping partner in the printers that published his books, James Ballantine and Company, Associated Publishing House, of John Ballantine and Company. He was also invested in his own publisher, Archibald Constable, believing that the returns in these equity stakes would be superior to traditional royalties. He kept these business interests secret, believing them to be incompatible with his standing as a clerk to the Court of Sessions and the Sheriff. The failure of Ballantine and Constable in 1825 left Scott with debts of between 117 and 130,000. Rather than sell Abbotsford, Scott vowed to ride his way back into the black. He succeeded, but at a considerable cost to his own health, dying in 1832. Had he died earlier, creditors would have been the beneficiaries of the Scottish Widows policy. The original 1906 advertisement was photographed by David Bailey, with actor Roger Moore's daughter Deborah as an probably alluring Scottish widow. This one says Miller Ravi did everything store. Seems like there's a lot of Jeff Bezos, but I guess. Well, just switch it up. Okay, I'm switching it up. Because you're right to ask it. Seems to be no real satisfying answer or definitive gauge. Taking off the rubber bands. This says Hiroshima. Hovered over the destruction caused by LeMay's area bombing. Did the incineration of these cities and the creation of a civilian death toll that exceeded the number of Japanese soldiers killed in all of World War II contribute anything essential to the defeat of Japan? There's overwhelming evidence that the decisive battle in the Pacific War occurred at Leyte Gulf in the Philippines during 4 days in late October 1944, when ships of the U.S. Navy's 7th Fleet annihilated the Great Nipponese Armada and cut Japan's lifelines to the oil and other resources an empire needed to sustain its war-making power. It took time for the stranglehold to take effect. By the time General LeMay's B-29s began their campaign against Japan's civilians and cities, the entire military machine of that nation was grinding to a halt. This is the reality as cast clouds of doubt over the U.S. Army's Air Force claimed that urban area raids cut the extra hard out of Japan's war machine. The fact that few Japanese fighters appeared to defend their homeland against the lethal onslaught of the B-29s was by itself indication that Japan was prostrate because the U.S. Navy had severed Japan's access to overseas oil it needed to operate its war machine. It took a heavy dose of self-deception in spring 1945 for chiefs of the U.S. Army Air Force to pretend they were going to win the war by gutting Japan's industrial cities. They knew everything there was to know about the impact of an oil cutoff on the ability of an enemy nation to wage war. The interdiction of petroleum supplies had been the paramount achievement of the precision bombing in Europe, and Arnold's generals knew that war production is meaningless if a nation has no oil. This awareness raises grave doubts about the motives and goals of the U.S. Air Force leaders that launched a city-burning campaign led on March 9, 1945. If the urban conflagration incidentally consumed some aircraft, for example, were they justified in asserting they were striking decisive blows at the enemy when fuel was not available to keep significant numbers of Japanese planes airborne? How much did the cripple Nipponese power that spring to pound cities that sustained steelworks or tank factories or harbors? The Japanese had insufficient fuel to operate their mechanized ground forces and ships. And how were Arnold and his aides able to rationalize that their urban area bombing was choking vital piecework manufacturing millions of Japanese homes when Japan's capacity to wage mechanized war was faded to a halt? This one is The Fallen Sky, the Eliza Kimberly story. Today's science building at Washington University was no palisade, hole, or cut. After his notice in the Topeka Daily Capital, Craig more or less dropped from the scene. Other scientists began to post material about the meteorites in scientific journals. The geologist Robert Hay called them the Kimberleys the day after Cragen. It seems that he bought no specimens, but he did sketch a simple evocative drawing of the homestead. The piece is strongly horizontal, with the prairie broken by a few rough bushes, sandhill plum perhaps. There's a windmill, a house, 2 low outbuildings, a light sky. Hay also mapped where specimens had been found, shared the data with Tiffany's George Coons, whose June 1890 article in Science was the first major research article on the discovery. Hay eventually obtained some of the meteorites and reported the discovery of clusters of small meteorites that ranged across portions of the fall site. The third man on the scene, F.H. Snow of the University of Kansas, visited the Kimberleys on March 17th, then on March 22nd, again on March 29th. Snow obtained 5 specimens. Who knows that the sickly cowboy had napped? He sold all the coons except for an irregular plum-shaped mass, which he kept. He estimated that the total weight of specimens thus far was more than 2,000 pounds, all having dropped in a zone about a mile long. He also reported the meteorite cells had cleared that Kimberly farm from a heavy mortgage, placed the family in comfortable circumstances. Indeed, Eliza Kimberly became, wrote Edmonds letter, decades later, the richest woman in Kiowa County. Though Snow merely mentions how one specimen he obtained was found only after long research, otherwise the men are somehow collaborate on various aspects of Snow's activities. According to Harvey manager, Frank paid $50 for the meteorite that a local attorney had owned, and he sold it for more than $200, presumably to Snow. According to Till, Eliza, who seemed now to be treating the meteorites as a business enterprise, bought this meteorite for $1 and sold it for $500. Kansas City Star reporter wrote that Frank bought this stone from a lawyer for $3 and sold this stone for $150. People also claimed that Kimberly refused to consider doctrinal solicitations, finally led him around the end of an old haystack and revealed a small iron meteorite which was immediately secured by Professor Snow. This collecting frenzy kept Frank looking for meteorites on the Kimberly land in town, where, like Eliza, he bartered and bought rocks from locals. He was stuck at least once when a colorful rocky bot turned out to be burnt coal cinder. The money poured in, Frank regretted how he had done burning the meters in a field years before instead of bringing it to the house. I had fortune in my hands to the way, he said. The frenzy pitted rival parties against one another as the Kansas City Star made clear. After paying Judd Evans $500 for a 218-pounder, Snow and Evans found that Tiffany had telegraphed an offer more than twice the price. The agent threatened litigation, article said. Snow finally convinced him that the $500 sale was closed. When the museum in Austria offered Snow $1,500 for the specimen, he wouldn't sell. The Washington field document I uncovered in my Kimberly research, Snow's notes about his Tequila County, gave me cursive glances into the collecting. Snow noted weights, ownership, appearances, uses, and which ones Craig had managed to acquire. For example, the palace that kept atop its gable roof was nicknamed the Scraggy Meteorite. Snow briefly told the story of the mounted cavern of stones, word of a Mr. Harmon's meteorite, this one that held down the haystack, and Mr. Treated Force meteorite, shared way down the pickle jar. This is The Year of Living Biblically by A.J. Jacobs, a dude that tried to live the Ten Commandments and stuff, or the Bible for a year. So let's read what this one has. Wrapped chocolate crickets. I'm going to need a fellow traveler on this one. Ask Julie, but she gives me another and long and overly enthusiastic. Thanks for asking. I'm going to take a pass this time. So I take a couple of crickets along to dinner with my friend John. For the last book, John went to singles bars to try to pick up women, using facts from the encyclopedia about penguin mating rituals, so I figured he might be willing. He wasn't so sure. My first thing the next couple of days, I'm going to blame you. Fair enough, I said. I'll think about it. I can finish dinner at downtown diner or eat my cricket. Which I swallowed. I popped the cricket in my mouth, bite down twice, then chugged water, ingesting like a chestnut-sized pill. I tasted nothing. After the one to John, come on, just one. Fine, he says. John wraps his cricket, takes a bite, chewing slowly while looking at ceiling brow for a thought. You like it? A little crunch, he says. Hard to actually taste the cricket. Are we supposed to be tangy? Is it tangy? The chocolate's overpowering, but you do get a nice crispness. He takes in the other half. Tastes like that candy bar crackle, same consistency. A couple days later, I'm at my grandfather's house boasting about my insect eating. My cousin Rick, who's a high school sophomore, is impressed. You eat insects all the time, since there are insect parts in everything. Rick has embraced entomology with a passion that most kids reserve for baseball and illegally download music. If E.O. Wilson had a poster, Rick would have it on his wall, so presumably he knew what he was talking about. He did. I found some pretty disturbing food and drug imagery on the website was natural and unavoidable amounts of insects for every kind of food. 100 grams of pizza sauce can have up to 30 insect eggs. 100 grams of drained mushrooms may contain 20 or more maggots. If you want a regular mushroom pizza, you'll be enjoying 1250 or more insect fragments per 10 grams. So I was violating the Bible rules even without intending to, or maybe not, depends on the interpretation. Orthodox Jews usually reason that since they didn't have microscopes in biblical times, the Bible must be visible with their eyes to be forbidden. Why would God weigh in on insects at all, visible or not? Once again, my second mind wanted to know the reason for the Lord's decrees. What's the logic? The Bible doesn't say. It's one of the unexplained laws. One book I read, the unauthorized version by Robin Lane Fox, had a theory. So in biblical times, swarming locusts would often devour the crops and cause famines. The only way for the poor to survive was by eating the locusts themselves. If the Bible didn't approve of locust eating, poor Israelites would have died of starvation. They said, one more, I feel it's important to look at the Bible with an open heart. For up your sleeves, even the oddest passages, learned about edible bugs, qualifies, can be seen as a sign of God's mercy and compassion. You shall rise up before the gray-headed and honor the aged. Leviticus 19:32. You shall rise up before the gray-headed and honor the aged. Leviticus. Day 142, I'm currently in Florida. Drew and I made a trip to Boca Raton for the wedding of Julie's college friend. We got through airport security without a second glance, and we were both happy and slightly concerned about the screener's vigilance. The day before the ceremony, we were at a strip mall restaurant. It's 5 p.m. Jasper's in lunchtime. Florida, 5 p.m. dinner. As you can imagine, average age approached that of Jim's patriarch. Maybe now includes those 969 years. Perhaps Methuselah, who cited 895 years. The Bible has a lot to say about your elders.
It's also a rhetorical performance. He, and in fact, anybody who's read even the opening line knows that Bishop decided to write this in the style of the time in which it was written.
It says the future of life, nature's last stand.
Experts discuss the possibility
While the creation itself is at stake, very few are committed conservationists. Seen from a historical perspective, however, the hesitancy of the majority is understandable. The sacred texts of the Abrahamic religions contain few instructions about the rest of the living world. The Iron Age scribes who wrote them knew war. They knew love and compassion. They knew purity of spirit, but they did not know ecology. A more realistic view of the human prospect is now in order. Overpopulation and environmentally ignorant development are everywhere shrinking natural habitats and biological diversity. In the real world, governed equally by the market and natural economies, humanity is in a final struggle with the rest of life. If it presses on, it will win a Cadmean victory, which first the biosphere loses, then humanity. A typical battlefield of the struggle is Hawaii, America's most deceptively beautiful state. For most residents and visitors, it seems an unspoiled island paradise. In actuality, it is a killing field of biological diversity. When first Polynesian voyagers put ashore around 8400, the archipelago was as close to Eden as any land that ever existed. Lush forests and fertile valleys contained no mosquitoes, no ants, no stinging wasps, no venomous snakes or spiders, and few plants with thorns and poisons. All these infelicities are abundant now, have been introduced by human commerce, both deliberately and accidentally. Pre-human Hawaii was biological diversity unique. It seen from shore to mountain peak with at least 125, as many as 145 species of birds found nowhere else. Native eagles soared about thick forests that were home to strange long-legged owls and a glittering array of painted honey creepers. On the ground, a species of flightless ibis foraged alongside the moa and mallow, goose-sized flightless birds with jaws vaguely resembling those of tortoises, Hawaii's version of the Mauritian dodo. Almost all these endemic forms are now extinct. Only 35 of the original species of birds still exist, of which 24 are endangered, with dozens so rare maybe beyond recovery. Few of the survivors, mostly small honey creepers, can still be glimpsed in scattered lowland habitats. The majority, however, cling to life in densely forested upland valleys with high rainfall, as far removed from human presence on the islands as possible. To see Hawaiian birds, the ornithologist Stuart L. Pinn reported after a series of field studies, one gets cold when tired. Hawaii's biodiversity today is still rich, but is highly synthetic. The vast majority of plants and animals easy to find originated somewhere else. In the immigrant vegetation in and around the resorts and hillside copses, the variety of skylarks, barn-spotted doves, hill robins, mockingbirds, bush warblers, mynas, strawberry finches, ricebirds, red-crested cardinals, none of which is native. Like the tourists admiring them, they travel to Hawaii by boat and aircraft from continents far away. The same species can be seen with monotonous frequency also in the warm temperate tropical zones of the world. Hawaii's plant life is also beautiful, in places extravagantly so. Very few of the species dominate the lowland vegetation among those through which the Polynesian colonists first cut their way. Of the 1,135 free-living flowering plant species recognized by botanists today, 902 are alien. These introduced forms dominate all but the least disturbed habitats. Even the vegetation investing the most natural appearing habitats of the coastal lowlands, lower mountain slopes, is primarily introduced. Hawaii's verdant glens are biogeographic facades populated mostly entirely by alien species. The lay placed around the necks of arriving visitors are appropriately made from immigrant flowers. Once over 10,000 kinds of plants and animals named Hawaii, many ranked among the most distinctive and beautiful in the world. They are descended during millions of years from several hundred pioneer species lucky enough to make the unassisted landfall on its most distant archipelagos. That number is now majestically whittled down. This from Guns, Germs, and Still. Guns, Germs, and Still. Coffee, chilling, dreary day. Gotta fix my TV real quick.
is he's taken the actual real writings through all the ages of mathematical development, and he annotates them and introduces them. But this book will give you
Start back in.
understanding of the history development.
This is Guns, Germs, and Still, Lethal Gift of Livestock.
It can be a little
About 10,000 years ago, and then accelerated with the rise of cities starting several thousand years ago. In fact, the first attested dates for many familiar infectious diseases are surprisingly recent, around 1600 BC from smallpox, acids from pockmarks on Egyptian mummy, 400 BC for mumps, 200 BC for leprosy, 1840 for epidemic polio, 1959 for AIDS. Why did the rise of agriculture launch the evolution of our crown infectious diseases? One reason just mentioned is that agriculture sustains much higher human population densities than does the hunting-gathering lifestyle, on average 10 to 100 times higher. In addition, hunter-gatherers frequently shift camp, leave behind their own piles of feces with accumulated microbes and worm larvae. But farmers are sedentary and live amid their own sewage, thus providing microbes with a short path from one person's body into another's drinking water. Some farm populations make it even easier for their own fecal bacteria and worms to infect their victims by gathering their feces and urine and spraying them as fertilizer on the fields where people work. Irrigation, agriculture, and fish farming provide ideal living conditions for the snails causing schistosomiasis and for flukes that burrow through our skin as we wade through the feces-laden water. Sedentary farmers became surrounded not only by their feces, but also by disease-transmitting rodents attracted by the farmers' stored food. Forest clearings made by African farmers also provide ideal breeding habitats for malaria-transmitting mosquitoes. If the rise of farming was less bonanza for our microbes, the rise of cities was a greater one. As still more densely packed human populations festered under even worse sanitation conditions. Not until the beginning of the 20th century did Europe's urban populations finally become self-sustaining. Before then, constant immigration of healthy peasants in the countryside was necessary to make up for the constant deaths of city dwellers from crowd diseases. Another bonanza was the development of world trade routes, which by Roman times effectively joined the populations of Europe, Asia, and North Africa into one giant breeding ground for microbes. That's the smallpox finally reached Rome, as the plague of Antoninus, which killed millions of Roman citizens between 165 AD and 180. Similarly, bubonic plague first appeared in Europe as the plague of Justinian, AD 542-553. But plague didn't begin to hit Europe with full force as the Black Death epidemics until 1346 AD, when a new route for overland trade with China provided rapid transit along the region's east-west axis for flea-infested furs from plague-ridden areas of Central Asia to Europe. Today, our jet planes have made even the longest intercontinental flights briefer than the duration of any human infectious disease. That's how an Aerolíneas Argentinas airplane, stopping in Lima, Peru in 1991, managed to deliver dozens of cholera-infected people that same day to my city of Los Angeles, over 3,000 miles from Lima. The explosive increase in world travel by Americans and immigration in the United States is turning us into another melting pot, this time of microbes that were previously dismissed as just causing exotic diseases in far-off countries. Thus, when the human population became sufficiently large and concentrated, we reached a stage in our history which we could at last evolve and sustain crowd diseases confined to our own species. That conclusion becomes a paradox. Such diseases could never exist before them. Instead, they had to evolve as new diseases. Where do those new diseases come from? Evidence has recently been emerging from molecular studies of the disease-causing microbes themselves. Many of the microbes responsible for unique diseases, molecular biologists can now identify the microbes' closest relatives. These also prove to be agents of crown infection diseases. Ones confined to various species are domestic animals and pets. Among animals, too, epidemic diseases require large, dense populations don't afflict just any animal. They confine many social animals providing the necessary large populations. Hence, when we domesticate social animals such as cows and pigs that are already afflicted by epidemic diseases, just waiting to be transferred to us. For example, measles virus is most closely related to the virus causing rinderpest. That nasty epidemic disease affects cattle and many wild culturing mammals, but not humans. Measles in turn doesn't afflict cattle. Close similarity of the measles virus to the rinderpest virus suggests that the latter transfer from cattle to humans then evolved an immutable virus by changing its properties to adapt to us. That transfer is not all surprising, considering that many peasant farmers live in sleepy grounds.
That says Martin Gardner's codes and ciphers and secret writing. His column was taken over by Nicholas Hofstadter, and he renamed it from mathematical games to magical themas, which is actually an anagram of mathematical games. These guys made playing around with patterns and stuff. But this is a compendium